The first rumor didn't come from the department or from internal affairs, or even from anyone in law enforcement at all. It came from a teenage boy who sat shaking on the curb outside a convenience store, still clutching the receipt from the soda he had gone in to buy. His voice trembled when he told the responding officer that he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to see, something that looked like a cop beating another cop while they yelled about a secret. The report was brushed off as teenage exaggeration, but it slipped through the cracks and landed quietly in a folder no one wanted to open. No one except the man at the center of the secret. Dr. Martin Hale, newly appointed police commissioner, had been meticulous during his first weeks in office. He reviewed every closed case, every disciplinary file, every record of officers who had complaints vanish without explanation. And in every stack, in every set of documents he studied late into the night, one name kept appearing: Officer Rick Dalston, a man with a spotless reputation on paper, but a trail of unspoken stories behind him: profiling complaints, intimidation claims, warnings from supervisors that seemed to disappear the moment they were filed. But Hale had another reason to focus on Dalston, one nobody knew. Something he had promised himself he would never reveal. Something buried so deep that even the department's most experienced investigators had no idea it existed. On a quiet Wednesday, when Dalston pulled over the wrong driver, that buried secret began to slip toward the surface. Dalston had always been good at reading people. At least he thought he was. He prided himself on spotting trouble before anyone else did, though his definition of trouble shifted depending on the color of the person behind the wheel. When the black SUV stopped without hesitation and the driver rolled down the window with calm eyes and an unreadable expression, Dalston felt a ripple of irritation. People usually showed fear. He liked that. Fear made them predictable. But this man didn't flinch. It should have been his first clue. Instead, Dalston puffed out his chest, leaned into the window, and demanded documents with the tone of a man who believed authority belonged only to those who looked like him. What he didn't expect was how quietly the man reached into the glove compartment, how he handed over the license with no emotion, no panic, no fear, only a strange stillness that made Dalston uneasy. He walked back to his patrol car, muttering under his breath. But when he typed the name into the system, the screen blinked back information that sent a jolt through his body. Dr. Martin Hale, police commissioner, his new boss. He swallowed hard. His palms began to sweat. In one split second, everything inside him flipped. His tone changed. His posture softened. His arrogance evaporated. But it was too late. Hale had already seen everything he needed to see. Yet Hale didn't say a word at first. He stepped out of the SUV slowly, studying Dalston with a gaze that felt like a knife pressed against the skin. Not cutting, not yet, but threatening to. What Dalston couldn't know was that Hale had been watching him far longer than this traffic stop. Long before he became commissioner. Long before the department even knew Hale's name. Dalston was connected to something Hale had been investigating privately, off the books, for years. Because Dalston wasn't just a bad cop. He was a liability to danger, and Hale knew exactly how dangerous, because Hale had been the one who buried the first report on him a decade earlier, a decision that haunted him every night since. When Hale placed Dalston on administrative leave, Dalston's face fell, not because he feared losing his job, but because he recognized the look in Hale's eyes. Not disappointment, not anger, recognition. The next morning, a quiet storm rolled through the department. Computers were seized. Files were reopened. Body cam footage was re-examined frame by frame. Officers whispered in break rooms and hallways. Why would the new commissioner target one officer so aggressively? What was Hale looking for? The more they dug, the stranger things became. Complaints that should have been filed in one office ended up in another. Video evidence seemed swapped, mislabeled, or replaced. Witness statements were rewritten. It was as if someone had been cleaning up after Dalston for years, but not in a protective way, more like in a way that prevented patterns from being noticed, as if someone wanted Dalston active. Eye in the field. Unstopped, the internal investigation unit worked hours past midnight. They found gaps in case timelines, strange overlaps, unexplained erasures in the system. At first, it looked like corruption. Then it looked like a cover-up. But by the end of the week, it looked like something far worse. Someone high above Dalston, someone with access, power, and authority, had been orchestrating the disappearance of evidence. Someone who feared what Dalston's misconduct might expose. Someone who might have used Dalston as a weapon without Dalston ever realizing it. When Hale was questioned, he gave nothing away. He answered only what he needed to. He never flinched, never hesitated. But something in his voice, in his manner, in the way he scanned each room, each question, each document, they all hinted that he was hiding something too. And he was, because a decade earlier, before Hale became commissioner, before he was even a chief investigator, he had been assigned to a case involving a violent traffic stop that left a black man in a coma. The suspect was never officially identified. The reports were scrambled. The officer involved disappeared from the roster without explanation. Hale later learned that evidence of that case had been destroyed, and the man responsible for destruction, Rick Dalston. But the real secret, the one Hale had vowed never to reveal, was that the victim of that traffic stop had been Hale's own younger brother, a brilliant law student, a quiet soul, a man with no enemies. The case had been buried before Hale could fight back, and Hale had spent the next 10 years slowly, quietly climbing the ladder of the department, gathering information piece by piece, waiting for the moment he could expose the men who covered it up. And one of those men was Dalston. When confronted with the new evidence, Dalston panicked. He denied everything. He claimed he was being framed. He insisted he had followed protocol his entire career. But his eyes betrayed him. Something inside him cracked. And when investigators found inconsistencies linking him to several unsolved internal complaints, his story started falling apart. Still, something didn't add up. Dalston wasn't smart enough to orchestrate a decade-long cover-up. Someone had guided him. Someone had cleaned up after him. Someone had been using him like a pawn. When pressed, Dalston finally confessed, not to a crime, but to something even more alarming. "I did what I was told," he said. "I always did what I was told." "By who?" investigators asked. Dalston stared at the table, shaking his head. "I can't say," he whispered. "They'll come for me." But he said one more thing, one sentence that sent a chill through every investigator in the room. "You think Hale is the one watching you," Dalston murmured. "But you have no idea who's watching him." That was the moment the investigation took a sharp turn. Evidence didn't point toward Dalston as a mastermind. It pointed past him, somewhere higher, somewhere darker. And the deeper they dug, the closer they came to something that felt less like misconduct and more like a hidden network of influence operating inside the department. Whispers spread quickly. Files went missing again. Officers who talked too much received anonymous warnings. Point one investigator had his car broken into. Nothing stolen except his notebook containing interviews about Hale's brother. Someone was trying to bury the truth again. The case reached court in fragments. Dalston was charged with misconduct, but not the deeper crimes he was suspected of. The prosecution had enough to destroy his reputation, but not enough to uncover the hidden power behind him. He was sentenced to 5 years. But even as he was let out of the courtroom, he kept looking at Hale with a strange, terrified expression as if he knew something Hale didn't, or refused to believe. And the commissioner, who had waited 10 years for justice, felt no relief, only dread, because the moment Dalston disappeared behind the courtroom doors, Hale received a text from an unknown number. "You should have left the past buried." The message was followed by a photo, a grainy image, nighttime, someone standing outside Hale's home, watching. The story doesn't end here, IT can't. Because the question no one can answer is the one that matters most. If Dalston wasn't the real threat, then who is the person powerful enough to threaten the commissioner himself? The photo arrived at 2:13 a.m. A dark silhouette standing outside Commissioner Hale's home, half hidden beneath the branches of an oak tree. No visible face. No identifying details. Only the reflective glare of a phone screen aimed toward Hale's front window. Toward him, the moment Hale saw it. A familiar coldness pressed into his spine. The same feeling he'd felt a decade earlier, when he'd first learned his brother's case had been buried by unknown hands. The same feeling he'd felt whenever he sensed someone in the department was watching him too closely, listening too intently, waiting for him to slip. But this time, the message wasn't subtle. It wasn't coded. It was a warning. You should have left the past buried. Hale didn't sleep the rest of the night. He sat in the dark living room, breathing slow, controlled breaths, every muscle tense. Not out of fear, but out of calculation. Whoever sent that message knew where he lived. That meant they had access to information only a handful of people possessed. But the part that bothered him most wasn't the threat. It was the timing. They sent it the moment Dalston was convicted. As if Dalston's sentencing wasn't the end of something, but the beginning. By sunrise, Hale was already at headquarters. His staff noticed a shift in him, his eyes sharper, his posture rigid, his silence deeper. Even the senior officers avoided his gaze. They sensed something was changing, but they didn't know what. Only one person dared approach him. Lieutenant Nora Briggs, his most trusted investigator. "Sir, you're not going to like this," she said, stepping into his office without waiting for permission. Hale looked up. "What happened?" She placed a thin folder on his desk. Dalston requested protective custody at 4:47 a.m. Hale frowned. "On what grounds?" Nora hesitated. "He says someone inside the department is going to kill him." Inside the department. The words hit like a strike to the ribs. Hale opened the folder. Inside was a transcript of Dalston's emergency statement, handwritten and shaking. A few sentences were crossed out. Some lines were smudged, as if he'd been crying or sweating. But the core message was unmistakable. "It wasn't me. I was told what to do. I never knew the whole plan. They used me. They used everyone. They told me to watch your brother. I didn't know what would happen to him. I didn't know they'd go that far." Hale's hands tightened around the page. He forced himself to keep breathing. "Did he name anyone?" he asked quietly. Nora shook her head. "No one. He's terrified." Hale closed the folder and sat still for a long moment. Dalston was falling apart. His arrogance had collapsed into paranoia. And paranoia only grew that fast when it had a reason. Someone was tying up loose ends. "Where is he now?" Hale asked. "In holding," Nora replied. "Under guard. But, sir, you know how this department works. If someone powerful wants him gone, isolation won't stop them." Hale nodded slowly. He did know, better than anyone. "Look," Nora added, lowering her voice. "If someone inside the department orchestrated a decade-long cover-up, we're not dealing with misconduct. We're dealing with a network, a structure, someone with influence, reach, and a damn good reason to get rid of anyone digging too deep." Her eyes flicked to the folder. Starting with Dalston. Hale leaned back, the weight of 10 years settling on his chest. "Get him here. Now. I want to talk to him myself." Nora exhaled in relief. "I'll bring him over with an escort." But she didn't make it out of the parking lot. Because the moment Dalston stepped out of the holding van, 3 officers around him, he collapsed. No gunshot. No struggle. No warning. Just fell face first, lifeless. Nora sprinted forward, heart pounding. "Call EMS. Now." But the paramedic on scene shook his head the moment he checked the pulse. "He's gone." Hale arrived within minutes. He knelt beside Dalston's body, staring at the man who had once ruined so many lives and yet had still died terrified of someone far worse. "Cause of death?" Hale asked. The paramedic swallowed. "Cardiac arrest. But, sir, this is strange." He lifted a small evidence bag. Inside was a torn piece of paper found clenched in Dalston's hand. A single sentence, scrawled shakily. "It wasn't me at your house." Hale froze. The investigators exchanged uneasy glances. Someone had gone to Hale's home the night before. Someone Dalston believed was dangerous enough to kill him. Someone who wanted Hale to know they were watching. But Dalston insisted it wasn't him, which meant someone else had been there. Someone who knew Hale's secrets. Someone connected to the cover-up of his brother's case. Someone ready to escalate. Hale stood slowly. His voice was steady, but his eyes held something darker than fear. Something colder. "Lock the building down," he said. "Nobody in or out without authorization. I want every server checked, every file traced. Find out who had access to Dalston in the last 24 hours. Nora hesitated. "Sir, If this goes as deep as we think it does, Hale cut in, and deeper, then we may not have anyone we can trust, she whispered. Hale looked at her. The only person he believed wasn't compromised. Then we start with you and me, he said, and we assume everyone else is a threat. The investigation widened instantly. Surveillance footage, phone logs, visitor lists, vehicle entries. None of it made sense. Everything was either too clean or too incomplete. Someone had wiped evidence in a way that didn't look sloppy. It looked practiced, planned, professional. Whoever killed Dalston wasn't covering a one-time crime. They were protecting something larger. By midnight, Nora found something that shifted the entire direction of the case. She burst into Hale's office, breathless. "Sir, you need to see this." She placed a file on his desk. It wasn't a new document. IT was one from a decade earlier, the night Hale's brother was attacked. The file had been lost for years, but now it had reappeared, almost too conveniently, and stamped across the top in faded red ink. Evidence handled by Captain Adrian Porter. Hale felt the air leave his lungs. Porter, the man who had mentored him, the man who had encouraged him to join internal affairs, the man who had supported his rise to commissioner, the man who had access to every restricted file in the department, the man Hale trusted more than anyone, and the man who lived 3 blocks away from him. Nora leaned closer, voice trembling. "Sir, Porter wasn't just involved. I think he led the entire cover-up." Hale exhaled slowly, closing the file. "Bring him in," he said, but Nora didn't move. "Sir, there's something else." She stepped back toward the door. "He's not home." Hale stood up sharply. "Then where is he?" Nora swallowed hard. "We trace his phone, his last location." She stopped. Hale narrowed his eyes. "Lieutenant, say it." Nora slowly raised her gaze. "His last location pinged outside your house, 10 minutes before that photo was taken." Silence flooded the room. For the first time in a decade, Hale felt real fear, not of the truth, but of how close it had always been. And as the weight of the revelation settled on him, Nora added one last detail, barely louder than a whisper. "Sir, Porter requested access to your brother's sealed medical records last week." Hale's pulse stopped. "Why?" he asked. Nora's voice cracked. "We don't know, but we found a second request, filed under his name last night." "For what?" Hale demanded. Nora lowered her eyes. "For your records." A long, suffocating silence filled the room. And then came the question neither of them wanted to ask. If Porter covered up Hale's brother's attack, why is he suddenly interested in Hale? And worse, what else had Porter been hiding all these years? And why did he choose now to step out of the shadows? Commissioner Hale didn't wait for backup. He didn't wait for authorization paperwork or the department's slow, grinding procedures. He drove straight to Captain Adrian Porter's home, alone, with a storm brewing behind his eyes. The same man who'd mentored him, supported him, guided him through the ranks, stood beside him when his brother accidentally died. The man Hale had once trusted like family. Now, Hale knew the truth. Porter had been there the night someone stood outside his house. Porter had requested access to his and his late brother's sealed records, and Porter had overseen evidence from the case Hale had spent 10 years trying to uncover. But the most chilling question wasn't what Porter was doing. It was why now. When Hale pulled up to Porter's house, the porch light was on. The curtains were drawn. The air felt still, unnaturally quiet. Hale felt the hairs on his arms lift, not from fear, but from the unmistakable feeling that he was walking straight into something built for him. He knocked once. Silence. Another knock. Still nothing. He reached for the doorknob. It turned. Unlocked. Hale stepped inside. The house was too clean, too organized, every cushion perfectly aligned, every photo frame dusted, every object placed with precision. Porter had always been orderly, but not like this. This was staged, artificial, for show. "Adrian," Hale called out. His voice echoed through the empty halls. No answer. He moved deeper into the house, checking each room with methodical precision. Office empty. Kitchen empty. Bedroom. Empty. But when he reached the study, something stopped him cold. A single, yellowed file sat on the desk. Its label, written in handwriting he recognized instantly, read, Hale Brothers, Confidential. His breath caught. It wasn't just his brother's case. IT was his brother's case in his own name, together in a file that should never have existed. Hale opened it slowly. Inside were documents spanning over 20 years. Surveillance logs, old school records, psychological evaluations, photos of Hale taken before he ever joined the department, notes about people he had spoken to, people he had dated, neighbors, teachers, friends, every chapter of his life. Watched, recorded, filed. A cold, heavy realization washed over him. Porter hadn't just been mentoring him, he had been monitoring him, guiding him, shaping him, positioning him exactly where he needed him to be. For what? Hale turned the next page and froze. A photograph slid out. A picture of Hale as a teenager, standing beside his younger brother. Behind them, partially hidden by the angle of the camera, stood a man with his hands in his pockets. A man who looked unmistakably like a younger Adrian Porter. Hale exhaled sharply. Porter had known his family long before they ever met. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't mentorship. This wasn't support. This was control. His pulse hammered as he reached the final page. It contained only one thing. A printed text message, sent to an unknown number. He's ready. Hale's stomach twisted. A floorboard creaked behind him. He spun. Porter stood in the doorway. His expression was calm, unbothered, almost fatherly. You weren't supposed to see that yet, Porter said quietly. Hale's voice was low, steady, lethal. What did you do to my brother? Porter studied him, almost with pity. You're asking the wrong question, Martin. He stepped closer, hands behind his back. The real question is why someone like you, someone with no connections, no political backing, no family ties, rose to the department faster than any man in its history. Hale didn't move. He didn't blink. His chest tightened painfully. You think you earned your position? Porter continued. You think you fought your way here? No. He smiled, soft and unsettling. You were placed here. Hale's jaw clenched. By who? For what? Porter's smile faded. Martin, you were never investigating us. His voice dropped to a near whisper. You were our insurance. Hale's heart pounded so violently he could feel it in his throat. What does that mean? He demanded. Porter stepped closer until he was only a few feet away. It means the moment you became commissioner, he said softly, your real purpose began. Hale felt the world tilt. My purpose, Hale repeated, numb. And what purpose is that? Porter reached into his pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. He placed it gently on the desk beside the file. Open it when I'm gone, he said. Every answer you think you want is inside, but you won't like what you learn. Hale's voice broke through his tightening breath. Adrian, what did you do to my family? Porter paused in the doorway, and for the first time, something cold flickered in his eyes. Your family, he murmured, was chosen. Hale's entire body went still. Chosen for what? Porter didn't answer. Instead, he said one final thing, so quietly Hale barely heard it. You're not finished yet, but someone else is coming. And when they arrive, everything you believe about yourself will collapse. Then he walked out the front door. By the time Hale reached the porch, Porter's car was already disappearing around the corner, taillights bleeding into the night. Hale stood there, breath frozen, his blood roaring in his ears. Inside the house, the envelope waited on the desk, silent and heavy. And in that moment, Hale knew the sickening truth. He had not uncovered the conspiracy. He had not exposed the shadow network. He had not ended anything. He had only opened the first door. The real architect, whoever Porter was afraid of, hadn't shown themselves yet, but they knew who he was. They knew where he lived. They had watched him his whole life, and now they knew he was getting closer. Too close. Hale picked up the envelope with shaking hands. But he didn't open it. Not yet, because the question clawing at the back of his mind was far more terrifying than anything inside that envelope. If Porter wasn't a mastermind, then who had been preparing Martin Hale since childhood. And for what purpose? The story ends here, for now, because the person who's coming for Hale has already taken their first step toward him.